For all the Zionists out there, I want to give you a message because I realize you guys are really convinced that Donald Trump is a threat to the existence of Israel. I mean, you said it yourself, okay? I'm not saying it, you said it.
Perhaps we should start considering the Trump administration as a serious threat to our existence.
Donald Trump and the White House isn't abandoning Israel, okay? They still got your back. Welcome to another episode of Political Newbie. I'm Noah Clark, and this is a space for newbies to politics like me, an average citizen, waking up from a dream and trying to make sense of the mess that I'm waking up in, and I thank you for joining me. So I really wanted to start off this episode with good news because the supersized humanitarian aid plot between the US and the Israelis have been partially thwarted, and aid is getting into Gaza via non-shadowy means. 9 out of 400 plus trucks making its way to almost 2 million starving people is not something we can totally rejoice, but it is a move or a step in the right direction. Now, let me just recap my understanding of what happened. The independent journalists and the public discovered the nefarious plan that the Israelis and the US were concocting, whereby a shadow humanitarian foundation was established back in February in Geneva, Switzerland, with the intention, I suspect, of manufacturing a severe humanitarian aid crisis in Gaza, which Israel did impose at the beginning of March. 2 weeks after the creation of this mercenary humanitarian aid foundation. Israel was able to hold out on aid for 78 days, nearly 3 months, with the help of its Western partners, of course, in order to ensure that humanitarian aid crisis was severe enough to be effectively weaponized towards the goal of ethnically cleansing the Palestinians out of Gaza once and for all. The Israeli utopian dream circa 1947. Donald Trump did what he was trained to do, which was put on a performance at the end of April, saying that he was going to get aid into Gaza and that he was pressuring the Israelis to do it. Although they had been putting together this Gaza Lago Riviera strategy since February or before. If you made it this far, I'd love to see you in the comments. If not, leave a thumbs up and let me know that you were here. Thank you so much. Now, here's a little bit of perspective to show you how fast they were moving with this plan. January 20th, Donald Trump gets sworn in. February 4th, 2 weeks later, Donald Trump announces the Riviera in the Middle East plan, which implies that he and his buddies were talking about this some amount of time before he announced it publicly. Can we all agree on that? February 12th, 8 days later, shadow foundation involving US and Israeli military and intelligence officials was put into place in secret, courtesy, I'm sure, of some conference room planning that took place at least weeks in advance of registration date. March 2nd, 2 weeks after the establishment of this shadow foundation, a severe humanitarian crisis was put into action by Israel. They must have been really confident about this plan because they were moving really quickly. They didn't waste any time. April 27th, like about a month later, Trump suddenly decides he'll put some pressure on Israel because, we can't just sit and watch the Gazans starve, right? I mean, yes, my administration is deporting students and criminalizing anti-genocide speech while funding and arming the thing. And obviously, we're not going to stop being fully committed to our greatest ally. But they definitely need to rein in their naughtiness just a little bit. Okay, just a little. So the last 3 weeks of May, we all witnessed an even greater spike in anti-Zionism, or as Zionists would like to say, anti-Semitism, as the shadow plot that the US and the Israelis were concocting was exposed. May 19th, 2 days ago, shadow plan partially thwarted. So, Bibi conceded and is now letting a dribble of aid into Gaza via the appropriate humanitarian aid channels. Donald Trump and the US will be able to claim plausible deniability, and his blind loyalists, who are smarter than all of us combined, will remain convinced that Donald Trump is not a Zionist puppet. Can I just add that as more and more countries join the choir of condemnation towards Israel, there will no doubt be a global campaign to sanitize the historical records of this indelible stain on Israel's character in the very near future. Wait for it. It's coming, and be prepared. Brace yourself. So let's use our printers and print all the articles for posterity and inform our children now before they make it anti-Semitic to tell the truth about this moment in time. We already know what the Zionists are going to be saying 10 years from now, right? It's a lie. Israel never weaponized starvation or actively genocided the Palestinians. It was Hamas. If it wasn't for Hamas, the Zionist Jews would have never flooded Palestine in the early 20th century. If it wasn't for Hamas, the Palestinians would have submitted peacefully when the Zionists were preaching about the establishment of a Jewish majority state in the mid 20th century. But instead, the Palestinians resisted, and we had no choice but to execute a Nakba. Remember, Hamas. Yeah. We definitely want to avoid that. So print all the articles, okay? Because they will definitely be rewriting history. You can bank on that. Now, can we give a round of applause to the resilience of the Palestinian people who are enduring unimaginable cruelty, but continue to be citizen journalists, countering the revisionist narratives that our Zionist media and governments are desperately hoping will dominate our hearts, minds, and memories. And we can be certain the Hollywood propaganda films on this catastrophe are already being penned to try and confuse and influence our youth to prevent them from landing too firmly on the anti-Zionist side of history. Can we also give a round of applause to the resilience of all the people protesting on the street who are getting violently attacked by police officers who are meant to protect them and their First Amendment right, having their lives wrecked in order to defend the oppressed. And a round of applause for all the leaders and activists around the world going blue in the face, speaking up and amplifying awareness.
So New Zealand has joined 22 other countries and the European Union in calling for Israel to allow for a full resumption of aid into Gaza immediately. My question to you, though, is why the delay in this level of joined-up thinking from the so-called Western world?
Well, I think partly because the reasons just gone through in the previous commentary, many European countries in particular felt after the Holocaust a sense of guilt, and there were reluctant to move against Israel. I think the other factor here is that many liberal democracies, particularly in Europe, were waiting to see. They basically were quite deferential to the United States when Biden was president, and they were waiting to see when Mr. Trump became president what was his position. I think there's a realization now that public pressure is such in many European countries, and not just European countries. If you take a country like New Zealand, there's been widespread protests in many cities. And I think there's a sense that in liberal democracies, they can't ultimately be indifferent to public concern about the situation. So I think that's a factor. I think another factor is a perception amongst many countries that Mr. Trump himself is getting impatient with the Netanyahu government. And that's been indicated by the fact that the Trump administration negotiated directly with Hamas. Mr. Trump didn't visit Israel recently, so that may have emboldened those countries that have been sitting on the fence. But it's quite clear that Israel now finds itself under a lot of pressure from many liberal democracies.
The fact isn't lost on us, right? That these liberal democracies needed Trump's impatience with Israel to be a liberal democracy and respond to the overwhelming public outrage against funding and arming a genocide. What are we talking about here when we say liberal democracies? Exactly. But yes, round of applause to public pressure. However, as long as countries continue to fund and arm Israel, their threats are simply threats and theater.
I think another catalyst here for threatening sanctions is a recognition that the United States and Israel seem to be planning a joint initiative to distribute food and effectively disempower the UN. And I think that is not acceptable to many countries which want a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because the suspicion is that if the US and Israel jointly took over the distribution of humanitarian aid, then effectively the distribution of aid would be weaponized. And Mr. Trump has already indicated he actually envisaged the displacement of Palestinians from Gaza, a position which seems to coincide with some members of the Netanyahu government.
So clearly it was more than a suspicion that Donald Trump and Bibi Netanyahu were planning to put Hitler's legacy to shame, essentially, when it comes to the final solution. I think most of us understand that this fight isn't only for the Palestinians, but for all the people around the world who are being crushed right now under the boot of imperialism and empire. And had the IDF soldiers not be so consumed with evil, they would not have cheerfully live-streamed their genocide, and most of us would still be hypnotized into complicity by the mainstream media. So, in a very macabre way, thank you, IDF. And last but not least, a round of applause for RFK, please, had he not broken through the iron wall of censorship last year and found a way to reach those of us like me who weren't yet tuned into the Middle East conflict, many of us would still be in the dark. He let us know clearly and unapologetically that our health and our will are being systematically crippled by our government, or by the big banks and big corps that own our government, to reduce the population and render the survivors pharmaceutically dependent, reducing our ability and capacity for resistance. Now, yes, I do feel like he is being captured by the Zionists in our government and he is betraying his own commitment, but that's a topic for another day. Unfortunately, I am holding off on applause for Donald Trump because he's not transparent enough in his performances. His administration is finalizing the cleansing of the Epstein files for a reason. Could it be that the entire Zionist establishment is implicated, including him? And he continues the decades-long practice of risking everything, dumping money into a flailing terrorist state while our economy is collapsing on itself like Building 7. We've been consistently crashing our economy and wasting the lives of soldiers and failing after failing after failing military adventures in the poorest regions in the world with almost nothing to show for it except the increasing decline of our country. By the way, I had a veteran in the comments tell me that he was happy to fight in the Middle Eastern wars because it needed to be done in order to prevent us from being colonized by Muslims. Yes, we have soldiers that are ready and willing to die for Israel or Israeli propaganda. And not just for Israel, okay? Let's make this clear. The reality is, as I am discovering, is that the big banks controlling our governments are stateless and have no particular need for any country to be more successful than the other, which chills the blood, doesn't it? Their only priority is that there is a global economic structure in place that is profitable for them. Doesn't matter where it comes from. So if China becomes the leading world power, they will be totally okay with that. The world is just a game of chess to them, and they're moving Trump like a chess piece to serve whatever their purpose or plan is. And I imagine that all the chess pieces get rewarded one way or another. Like, I don't know, Epstein is most likely still alive. Trump's ambiguity and sharp turns should give us all some serious pause, simply because it was much easier to see the corruption when the other born and bred presidents were duping us. But Trump, he was able to convince many of us to give him a second chance on account of his ambiguity. Nevertheless, I think it is worth pointing out that the Zionists are anxious. They are. They're coping just as hard as the rest of us. We're upset that Trump is still funding and arming genocide in spite of the anti-Bibi theatrics. And the Zionists are upset that Donald Trump is even daring to put on a display of anti-Bibiness at all. Here's a Zionist channel where an Israeli and an American Zionist are chatting about current events and expressing the urgency with which Israel should speed up the genocide. Speed it up before the US goes completely rogue and ceases to serve Israel's interest.
I can also add my own opinion if you're interested. And that is, it's absolutely crucial that we move now, because the American administration is tying our hands. It is reaching deals over our heads without consulting us. And it blocks our routes of operation towards Iran. We are left only with Gaza. Now, lest they try to reach some deal which would force us to acquiesce to some Hamas presence in Gaza after this war, Israel must move now, establish facts on the ground, and occupy the whole of the Gaza Strip.
I'm sorry. So this was a few days ago. So imagine how they're coping now with the new developments. Wild. Look, I understand that the U.S. has been a partner and probably the parent to all the crimes against humanity perpetrated by Israel. But instead of saying, shit, we screwed up big time, they're like, no, F the U.S., let's have a knee-jerk reaction and make everything worse because Amalek. We want Armageddon and we want it now. Like, these are adults in the room here, because how dare the Palestinians resist the longest military occupation in history, save for the 70-year military occupation of Tibet by China? How dare you? So you know what? We'll make you extinct, and that'll teach anyone hoping to resist oppression the appropriate lesson. Furthermore, it'll let our Arabic neighbors know what's in store for them if they have any wild ideas about resisting our impending occupation as we carry on with our expansionist endeavors. Okay? Okay. However, there are Zionists with different perspectives on Donald Trump's distance, performative or otherwise, where they say that they are learning from some of our government representatives that the Americans don't care about the Palestinians. I'm sorry, it's really hard for me to say that with a straight face because I'm just thinking, like, don't they turn on social media? Don't they watch independent journalism or something? Because you're not going to see that on mainstream media. But then I realized everything is being censored over there in Israel, probably, I don't know. But they're saying that Americans don't care about the Palestinians and that that essentially Donald Trump's distance is giving them the go-ahead to just, handle business. At least that's what they're communicating to their Zionist audience so that they don't lose their collective minds. We all know how extraordinarily delicate these people are at the slightest criticism of Israel. So listen to how they help each other cope, okay? You're going to like this.
Okay, I want to talk about the U.S.-Saudi dynamic. If we look at all of these big moving pieces in the region, it begins to look as if the U.S. and Saudi Arabia have basically decided to leave Israel and the Palestinians to just figure it out, fight it out. It seems that Israel, has more or less a green light or at least a yellow light to just do whatever it needs to do in its backyard. I hear this often from senior U.S. administration officials who are, I would say, more in the, I don't like to use the word isolationist, they're more in the what we call the restrainist camp, where they basically say, we don't want to get involved in the Middle East. Israel's got to take care of, do what it's got to do in Gaza. They can do whatever they want. It doesn't bother us. It doesn't bother our voters. It doesn't bother our base. Like, let them have at it. And so is this what you're seeing too, not just from the U.S., but the Saudis? I'm not saying the Saudis want to see Israel run wild in Gaza in terms of extending the war beyond what many in the region think is necessary.
So the Saudis doesn't want to see the Israelis run wild because they're not running wild right now at all. That's their view of things right now, that they're pretty much being casual right now, genociding the population and starving them to death.
But is it just a general sense, like, let them figure it out?
I think that when the Saudis do their cost benefit analysis, the normalization with Israel is no longer as beneficial as it was before October 7th, just in terms of the risk they're taking from their population, because the Arab population is very much incited against Israel right now by pan-Arab media, but they don't want to give up on the other elements, right? The civil nuclear program and the defense pact with the U.S.
The woman was the voice of reason here. And I'm not saying that because she's a woman. I'm just saying, obviously, based on this conversation right here, the woman was the voice of reason. But there's so much fanatical coping going on because of this obsession with an Israeli utopia without a single Palestinian who values their autonomy, as opposed to, of course, a Palestinian who is completely subservient to Jewish supremacy. Interestingly enough, I came across an Israeli Druze interviewing an Israeli, and the Israeli tells him casually that he's a second-class citizen to his face. And this was really hard to watch, knowing that blacks were once not even full human beings before being promoted to third and second class citizens. Listen to this.
I'm thinking out loud now, and I'm not a politician. I'm not a religious, figure in the Jewish community, but, I have a brain and I have experience in my life. What I think is, if Israel is to take the area in the Golan Heights that they already took, make it part of Israel, there is Jewish villages there. These Jewish villages, bring them, make them part of Israel. That's what I think. You're going to get very loyal, very strong, independent citizens who are going to help you in every possible way. The rest of the Jews, I don't think, because we're talking here, what makes Israel unique is its Jewish identity. And I am very pro for that. So I don't know if Israel should bring now non-Jewish religions in big numbers into Israel. It's not.
That's why I believe in residency. I believe in residency. I believe that you are part of our thing, but that doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to shape the character of the country. Like, I very much believe in residency for loyal. They're part of our broader family, but there's a different status. And I for Americans, it's hard to hear, but for you, it's not so hard to hear. Better to be an Israeli resident than under the gun in Syria. Or do the Syrian Druze want an autonomy? Do they want their own, let's call it semi-state there of some kind?
So there's no way for me to tell how that guy felt listening to that. I'm sure it's not the first time he's heard it. And I'm sure he's already internalized his second-class status as a human being. But why is Israel going out of its way to wag its finger in our faces about this kind of democracy? I'm sorry to say, but that whole master-servant partnership thing that they got going on there freaks me out. And I implore you to go watch the entire interview. I will have a link to it in my description. But the Druze and the Israelis apparently have a better relationship than the Palestinian and the Israelis. So I'm afraid to find out what manner of subjugation the Israeli Palestinians have had to normalize within their consciousness in order to operate freely in Israeli society, especially now. And it seems to me that Zionists love conflating things, so we spend a whole bunch of time trying to untangle the meaning of the nonsense they keep spewing, but it's very clear that they consider all Palestinians in Gaza Hamas. And if you don't believe me, believe the Zionists.
אני אומר לך יותר מזה. כל ילד, כל תינוק בעזה הוא אויב. האויב הוא לא החמאס, והוא גם לא הזרוע הצבאית של החמאס, כמו שהפצ"רית שלנו מספרת לנו שאסור לנו לפגוע בחמאסניק, אלא אם כן הוא חלק מהזרוע הצבאית. כל ילד בעזה הוא האויב. אנחנו צריכים לכבוש את עזה וליישבה, ושלא יישאר שם ילד עזתי אחד.
I wonder how the Palestinians in Israel are feeling right now when they're watching this on the TV, that their brothers and sisters over there are worthy of being exterminated because. Now, they're so obsessed with getting rid of Hamas, aka all the Palestinians in Gaza, and of course the West Bank, obviously, and probably minimize the Palestinian population within Israel, that even the families, the Israeli families of the hostages and other Israeli citizens who are protesting for a ceasefire are essentially now Hamas, because they're now fully in line with the Hamas agenda. Okay? Listen to how desperate they're getting. Listen to this.
The anti-Netanyahu, bring them home now movement and Hamas operating in tandem. You know, Hamas releases footage of hostages crying for help on Saturday evenings when the Kaplan demonstrations are on. And they repeat the same message. Hamas dictates to its hostages to say on camera that it is Netanyahu's fault. Netanyahu would only want they would be home and so forth. And then the Kaplan people are repeating it. Because in a sense, their goals are the same. The goal is to undermine the right-wing government.
The goal, and the goal is also to get a ceasefire and to get a ceasefire that will undermine
and finish the war without an Israeli victory. Because that would topple
finish
Netanyahu.
the war with a draw, which would be an Israeli defeat, which can be laid at the hands of the Netanyahu government. Of course, the hostage families, and there are many people who just want to see the hostages released. They're not thinking about this strategically, just about the outcome of the effect on the lives of the hostages.
So even amongst themselves, as you can see, they have to tread lightly when they are trying to make sense and speak rationally. Right? As you saw the American Zionists walking on eggshells there to say that, yeah, most of the families, though, and the citizens are genuinely concerned about the hostages, honestly, and the fact that we are bombing and starving them along with the Palestinians. I mean, he didn't say that, but he would never say that, my God, because that would imply that we want a ceasefire, that a ceasefire is actually a reasonable thing to consider and to protest for.
You know my opinion that the way to get the hostages is just to pressure Hamas.
By the way, pressure Hamas means carpet bomb the whole region and starve the population. That's what pressure Hamas means. Okay.
Continuously until it screams for help and gives them up. I don't believe any deals they sign. And I think that what they're going to try to do, and they're sophisticated about it, is try to trap the Israeli government between the pressure of the anti-Netanyahu movement and the outside pressures of an American president who wants to finish the war. We will find ourselves at the end of this war without a victory. And that is a very, very serious thing. I think Israel cannot allow itself. I think the Netanyahu government cannot allow itself. If we lose the war.
Losing the war means that one Palestinian is alive in Gaza. That's for them a loss.
We lose the war and get the hostages in return, then that would mean that you can bring Israel to its knees by kidnapping. That is a terrible message to our enemies.
Yeah, Zionist logic, right? The chances that reason can penetrate these conversations is slim to none, and ultimately, even the reasonable voices end up accommodating the manic insanity of these bloodlusting fanatics. This is the mindset of the Zionist neocons in our government, poisoning the soul of our country. Just to remind you, in case you forgot. The mindset that took out the USS Liberty, one of our presidents, the Twin Towers, and successfully executed a silent genocide back in 2020. So us stupid, non-expert people who have common sense and intuition understood that Bibi did not ever care about the hostages. He murdered a bunch of them on October 7th under the Hannibal Directive and used their tanks to blow up some of the houses in Israel, which they, of course, blamed on Hamas, by the way. But they're so panicked lately that their utopian dream is slipping away, especially now that the US is creating some distance, that they're coming out and saying out loud, "To hell with the hostages." They're so unhinged that they can't even keep up the pretense anymore.
And they, as you are saying, are looking at the Haredim, who are also Orthodox. They're looking at them saying, why are we serving? Why are our sons dying? Why are our husbands not around? And you're not. You're in your yeshiva studying. And this is creating an internal tension that I don't think really existed before October 7th. And that's a societal, it's an intra-Israel societal tension that we don't spend as much time focusing on as we probably should. But it's also a tension within the Israeli government, because every faction I just mentioned, the Haredim, the national religious, then the regular Likud voters, which tend to be more secular, certainly, than the National Orthodox and the Haredim, they're all part of the same government. And suddenly some factions within the government are saying to other factions, I mean, there was this unbelievable moment a couple of weeks ago where Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, who's the leader of one of these national religious parties, basically said the hostages aren't the priority, defeating Hamas entirely is the priority. And he got some pushback from one of the head of the UTJ, United Torah Judaism, which is one of the ultra-Orthodox parties, and he pushed back and said, that's absolutely not true. The hostages are the priority. And Smotrich, from what I understand, pushed back and says, okay, well, if you're saying it's such a priority, why aren't your sons going into Gaza and fighting and dying? Like, if you're going to start telling us what the priorities of the war are, then go.
Don't even start trying to tell me what the priorities of the war are. It's not the hostages. We don't care. That's the reason why we invented the Hannibal Directive. Hello, did you forget? That's exactly what Smotrich, the Israeli community government, is saying right now. Look, I can't imagine how the soldiers are feeling about the government arguing about the priority of hostages, but you know what? They operate on an entirely different kind of logic than I do, so I don't think I can understand that. I don't have the capacity to, unfortunately. But the tension is definitely growing within Israel, and the panic that they're feeling is palpable. Their economy is collapsing because many businesses are closing down in order for people to go serve. They're running out of soldiers, and they're trying to tap into the exempt population. As you can see here, they're having an argument about why some religious factions of the Israeli population are exempt from serving. The mentally stable soldiers are either refusing to serve or committing suicide because they're unable to transition successfully into psychopathy. Yeah, I can definitely see why Zionists are in a panic right now. Even the fact that Israel is letting a tiny portion of aid into Gaza, just, for photo op, essentially 9 out of 400 trucks. And I know from doing a little bit of digging that you need about 500 trucks a day to service 2 million people. But even the fact that Israel is making this tiny concession that isn't really going to make a difference, the country is having a full-blown meltdown, and the government is now having to provide therapy. Here is Smotrich assuaging the country's panic.
הפשוט ביותר. שום סיוע לא נכנס לחמאס, נקודה. כל מי שאומר דבר אחר פשוט משקר, אני באמת לא יודע מה המניע שלו. אני הרי זה שהובלתי את הדרישה לחדול מהאיוולת של הכנסת אלפי משאיות שחמאס משתלט עליהם, מכר אותם והרוויח עליהם למעלה ממיליארד דולר. אני זה שהובלתי באופן מעשי את המענה החלופי של החברות האזרחיות, ואני אומר לכם באחריות, מה שהיה הוא לא מה שיהיה. תהיה הכנסה שהיא מחויבת המציאות של מינימום אוכל ותרופות לאוכלוסייה בעזה, שום דבר מזה לא יגיע לחמאס. צה"ל פועל מאז אתמול עם 5 אוגדות ברצועת עזה בעוצמה שלא נראה ראשית המלחמה. והפעם השיטה המבצעית שונה לחלוטין ממה שהיה בעבר. לא עוד פשיטות עם כניסות ויציאות, אנחנו כובשים, מטהרים ונשארים עד להשמדת חמאס. בדרך אנחנו משמידים את כל מה שעוד נשאר מהרצועה, פשוט, כי הכל שם זו עיר טרור אחת גדולה. זה שינוי אדיר ממה שהיה עד כה, וזה בעזרת השם יביא לניצחון, להשמדת חמאס ולהשבת החטופים. במסגרת המלחמה צה"ל מניע אוכלוסייה מאזורי הלחימה ולא משאיר אבן על אבן. אני אומר לכם, פשוט תסתכלו על הסרטונים של מה שקורה ברצועת עזה.
My God. Okay, I had to stop that because they're just saying it out loud that they're going to go and purify the region with God's help. With God's help. Anyway, oof, God, these are the people we're funding with our tax dollars while our neighborhoods and schools are run down and our streets are littered with homeless people, just to say the least of our problems. For all the Zionists out there, I want to give you a message because I realize you guys are really convinced that Donald Trump is a threat to the existence of Israel. I mean, you said it yourself, okay? I'm not saying it. You said it. Take a listen.
The Trump administration were insisting on zero enrichment. I can't believe that the Iranians would be negotiating with them at all because that's always been a red line for them. I can only surmise that there is some kind of cleverness going on here that will be bad news when it comes out. But I don't want to run with that until I get some real information. I don't know.
Yeah, so I haven't been so pessimistic since the Grim Beeper operation. Also want to factor in the fact that Tim Waltz was removed as a national security advisor and all his pro-Israeli team along with him. The growing influence of J.D. Vance, who is attached in some way or so, rumors say, to the Tucker Carlson faction. All this points in a very bad direction. And this is why I think, as I've said, we now have the ammunition. We should establish facts on the ground because we do not know how badly the Trump administration has turned against us. So it's not as bad as Kamala Harris. They've not become actively pro-Iranian, but a Middle East in which the United States and the Muslim Brotherhood and Saudi Arabia are teamed up to create a new regional order is a very hostile place for Israel. And perhaps we should start considering the Trump administration as a serious threat to our existence.
Okay, you heard that, right? He said it, not me. All right, but is it really that serious? I mean, what? Why are they talking like this? This guy wants to speed up the genocide, okay? He wants to abandon the hostages. They don't care how many soldiers will not be at work to implement this boots-on-the-ground operation, this Operation Gideon's Chariot that they want to put into place where they act out their wildest fantasies of going to town on the battered, starved, injured, unarmed population of Gaza. But at least he had his American Zionist friend there to really calm him down. But I don't know if it helped. You tell me.
You're going too far. Because, first of all, it really is early days yet. The administration is still finding it, getting its feet. Look at how it shifted on this question of enrichment. We have to we got to wait and find out what they're talking about with the Iranians. They've made it very clear statements about what their red lines are. If they come up with real clever, tricky formulas to say that they're adhering to the red lines when they really aren't, then that puts them in the Obama category. And Trump has said all along that Obama's that Obama's deal was a terrible, horrible, rotten, no good deal. It'll be very hard for him to defend. He said publicly that he wants basically no sunsets on the restrictions and so on. So I want to wait and see what's going to happen on the Iran negotiations. To me, that the Iran negotiations are by far the most important thing.
Okay, the Iran negotiations are by far the most important thing, right? So how did he do? Was he effective? Do you think he was effective at calming the Israeli Zionists down there? All of that to say that the Iranian deal is the most important thing. Look, they should have probably had me in the room, to be honest, on a Zoom call maybe, because I would have done a way better job than the American Zionists at calming, at just reducing the tension, getting everybody to breathe and relax, and just let them know that, listen, the anti-Zionist sentiment around the world is escalating exponentially. It's really getting out of control, especially in America. And so Donald Trump has to put on a show, okay? A lot of people are saying that Bibi is the president of the United States, and he has to really make it seem as if, no, he's the president, and he's not actually the vice president of Israel or something. And if you just zoom out and look at it big picture, right, he's still arresting people on the street and threatening to deport them. He's still criminalizing anti-genocide speech. He's still allowing police officers to beat up people who are not pro-Israel on the street. There are still new anti-Semitic definitions being pushed through Congress every other month or so. He's still arming and funding the thing. Guys, don't freak out, okay? Donald Trump is still on your team. And look, you're getting freaked out about this whole Middle Eastern alliance. I saw someone's podcast the other day where Leif Marouf, this guy who I also really respect, and I trust his analysis or his assessment on what's going on. And he pretty much said that the Zionists are in the bedroom with Donald Trump and Melania. The Zionists are already in Washington. You don't have to worry about it. The Zionists were there in Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the UAE. Like, they were there. Israel didn't get left out. So just, I know you're in a panic and you're not thinking straight. Calm down. Everything's okay. Israel is not being left out. The U.S. isn't I shouldn't say the U.S. I should say Donald Trump and the White House isn't abandoning Israel, okay? They still got your back. So, I would really urge them to invite someone like me on their show so I could sort of be like moral support for them and maybe even be a psychologist because, Jordan Peterson, who has a degree in psychology, really, really sucks. They probably need someone like a non-expert, like a regular person with, gut instincts who, that's all I'm saying. But yeah, guys, Zionists, relax. And to all my anti-Zionist buddies out there, I wish I had better news. I really, really do. I don't have better news right now, but I may have some good news shortly. So I want to thank you for stopping by. And if I don't see you in the comments, leave me a thumbs up to let me know that you were here. And I can't wait to see you in my next episode.